This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 26th of January 2022 at home in Wicklow. And the main focus of the episode this week is pain and wound, pain and wounds, and where we locate them, where we store them in our bodies, where they live in our consciousness, and how, if unaddressed, they can exert an excessive amount of power over our lives and over our sense of wellness and capability. So that is the main focus, and I also bring into that conversation the idea of objectivity versus subjectivity, and how if we understand better our own subjective experience, it can actually enhance our sense of wellness, it can enhance our resilience, and it can take the responsibility of others for our wellness and our happiness. So it all ties in. That's Ruby contributing to this introduction. Thanks for that, Ruby. Okay, I will talk to you real soon. Cheers. Bye.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. Welcome back if you're a return guest. Are you a guest? If you're not here with me, welcome back. I welcome the return of your ears. Welcome to this moment in time, this moment in this day, in this week, in this month, in this year, in this lifetime, wherever you find yourself. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're feeling well. Welcome to the show. Can it be a show if it's a listening experience? It's more of a tell. There's no spectacle. Nothing to see here, folks, unless you see with your ears. That's a thing, is it? Isn't that a thing? Isn't that the same way? What? I'm going to make an absolute mess of this. Isn't there that thing where people can see sounds? Is that right? That's a thing, isn't it? Yeah, well then that would lend itself well to this. Anyway, the spectacle of listening, that this is, you are welcome to it. I'm feeling a bit fragile myself. I don't know if it's an end of winter thing, although I have to say I've got another extraordinarily lovely January moment here. As I look out the window, I see a plane flying across the sky with a horizontal jet trail in its wake. The sun is shining, casting those low winter shadows, and it's nice. It's nice. There's a couple of really nicely formed cobwebs on the outside of the window, and the light is catching them as well. So I can't complain about that. That's nice, and it's nice to see a little bit of sunshine. There've been quite a few overcast days of late. It just feels like there's that blanket of gloom, that blanket of winter gloom can really just get on top of you a bit. So maybe a touch of that SAD syndrome, seasonal affective disorder, isn't that what it's called? So that kind of deprivation of light and brightness, not getting that vitamin D hit. Generally, I would argue I'm not that prone to that, but I had a migraine. I've had 2 migraines over the last few days. I started getting migraines in the last 18 months or so, and they're not pleasant. For any of you out there who have had migraines, you can clarify for me if I'm listing off the symptoms correctly. So typically starting with distorted vision, sort of partial loss of vision in either eye, sometimes accompanied by white flashes, and then that passes and I experience a sort of a low level nausea with that. Nausea. And then the headache comes, and it's a very spiky sort of headache it feels like it's across the brain. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like a band of pain across the brain. And that eventually passes as well, but then I'm left with a swelling, sort of a swollen, heavy pain that occasionally throbs and pulses behind, usually the opposite eye to the one where the distorted vision was. So I've had two of those in quick succession. I had one on Friday evening, and I woke up with one yesterday morning, which was most unexpected. I thought I was giving myself quite a good night's sleep, and there it was. It's a very disconcerting way to start the day. It sort of put me back on my heels a bit. In any case, maybe that's contributing to a certain fragility, a certain what? A certain anxiety or tenderness or vulnerability as I try to orient myself in the world at this moment. I was looking for a wheat bag that you can heat. So the wheat of heat, or the heat of wheat, one of those little bags you can throw in the microwave, heat up for a couple of minutes, and then put it on a sore part of your body, or just have it as a little proxy hot water bottle kind of thing. Anyway, I was looking for a red corduroy cushion wheat bag thing, and I failed to find it because I sat down here to record and I realised my hands were freezing. That was part of the symptoms yesterday as well. I couldn't get warm. My hands in particular were really, really cold. And again, very unusual for me because I generally don't have any issues with circulation. But anyway, I sat down here and I thought, no, I'd really like something on the hands. And I thought, oh, that wheat bag would be great. That red corduroy wheat bag. Corduroy just gives off a certain vibe, doesn't it? Anyway, I had a backup plan because I failed to locate the red corduroy bag, and instead, and I'm holding it in my hands right now, I've got a little Hey Dougie soft toy that has a wheat bag in it. It's one I got from my daughter last year. Do you know Hey Dougie? He's a dog. He's a cartoon dog who looks after these other kids, other young animals, and it's sort of set up like a scout camp, and each episode they win a badge, and Hey Dougie's just this big sort of cuddly dog, and the animals there's a crocodile and a rhino and a mouse and an octopus and what's the other one? There's one more. It's really great. It was a firm favourite of ours a few years ago, in particular when my daughter was a bit younger. Hey Dougie, he's a good character, and the creators, they sort of layer in some very gentle sort of groovy tunes and psychedelia, and it's very funny. So well worth checking out if you have any interest in that sort of thing. So Hey Dougie, I'm holding him in my hands, and Dougie is a great guy, and he's keeping my hands warm. And at the end of every episode of Hey Dougie, all the animals go and get a Dougie hug, and they all go, So that's nice, isn't it? That's nice. That's a good one. That's well worth checking out. Yes. So where to begin today? I am hovering around the area of objectivity versus subjectivity, and I'm also interested in talking about wounds and damage. I suppose I'm not talking about physical wounds, physical damage. I'm talking more emotional, psychological wounds and damage. And yeah, where those wounds sit, where we park them, where we store them, what they do to how we hold ourselves. Yes. So cheerful stuff. Not really cheerful stuff, but I think central to any bid to be well, and to live with a sense of wellness and with a sense of capability, has to come a resolving of wound, a resolving of pain, an understanding and a processing and a negotiation of pain. And until that's done, I think those experiences or that part of ourselves is inordinately influential and inordinately defining, and it's something that can, well, I believe it's just something that can really hold us back. It's something that can prevent us from being more aligned. It's something that can prevent us from feeling more capable of expressing and living our full selves. And, when I use expressions like that, to express or live one's full self, I'm not talking about, being amazing. I'm not talking about, having, extraordinarily high achieving, moment to moment existences. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I feel when I talk about that, like the way I think about it is, it's actually a quieting down and a sort of a grounding and a sort of a stilling, if you can hear the way I'm saying that word, like bringing one's, again, I hesitate sometimes with the vocabulary, with the language, because I feel it steers us in the wrong direction, but it's a sense of bringing one's power or agency back to a very accessible and controllable place, which feels close to us, which feels close to the individual, because your agency and your power, if it's far away from you, it's not accessible. How'd you like that one? So you want that sense of your potential, that sense of your, power, I'll come back to that again, to be something that feels, well, it's here and I can use it, and it's, it's in me, it's part of who I am, and I can measure it out as required, and I can keep control of it, and more importantly, I'm not going to give it away. I'm not just going to hand it over to someone else. So when I talk about, living your full self and expressing your full self, it's kind of in that territory of personal autonomy in a sort of in a psychological and emotional sense, and yeah, of course, in a physical sense as well, which this does recall some of the stuff that I would have touched on last week when discussing male violence, the crisis of masculinity, and women's fears, and personal agency is, it's in the mix in that conversation. What people feel they are allowed and not allowed to do. So in any case, this idea then of damage and of wound, and I'm using it sort of in the singular sense as almost like an abstract idea, like it leaves such a psychic impression on us, whatever that wound might be, a form of trauma, some level of trauma, and some level of damage that has marked us, scarred us, impacted us, and I'm very curious about where that lives and where we locate it, and whether that's just something that is is a memory, which, if I think of a memory, for me, a memory is a very head oriented thing. To recall a memory, to bring back an incident, to bring back an image, to bring back the personnel involved, to bring back the time of day, to bring back the location, where the incident or incidents took place. That can be just the replay of the movie. That can be the rewind, the pause, and the recall of that, and maybe a memory. Well, that's a question. What sort of power do our memories have over us? And I think you can. I think it's possible, and I think from a therapeutic point of view, if you when I was in therapy, my therapist was a NLP practitioner, so neuro-linguistic programming, and fundamentally, that's a way of revisiting memories and reframing them and reconditioning them, so how we respond to them is different. And when we find ourselves in similar situations in the present, which become echoes of the past, or they become a reliving of the past experience or the past trauma, and therefore become very provocative, triggering experiences. NLP offers methods to restructure those memories, so our response is changed. Our response is different, and I certainly found that very useful, and I've continued to find it useful over the years. 20 years on from that period of my life. When I went, when I felt the time was right to seek professional help, and I was lucky. I suppose I was lucky in that I felt very receptive to that suggestion at the time, and felt it was going to be, a very useful thing to do, and so it proved. And I've had no issues whatsoever in my life since. Disclaimer, that is a totally false statement. But in any case, memory, memory is, we can't just separate it like that, ultimately. Without doing, work and being in a controlled environment, and maybe with the direction of a professional and being facilitated in a safe place. There's a way to do that. But outside a therapeutic space, memories, of course, can be triggering. Memories can be painful, and memories can cause us to respond emotionally, and in very extreme ways, of course. When I used the word painful there a moment ago, I put a bit of a facetious colour on it, and I take that back, because, of course, people who have been through really extreme traumatic experiences, those memories become absolutely defining and debilitating, and certainly are an aspect of PTSD, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the recall of those memories is fundamentally, unbearable, and yet ever present, and brings with it related stress of ever present anxiety, and I believe sort of a conviction that you're not safe, and that things are not going to go well, and that it's only a matter of time before an event is going to impact you again in an extremely adverse way. And that's at the extreme end of the spectrum. So again, hearkening back to last week's episode, that would be victims of sexual assault, that would be victims of physical assault, that would be, typically, I think when we think PTSD, many of us, our first thought is to think of people who've been to war and experienced the extremity of human violence, of human carnage, and the sensory assault of what is seen and consumed in war is almost unbearable. That's that's my sense. I remember writing about this before on the clearout.com, and I wrote a piece, and I think my sort of fundamental position was, the nature of military training is to dehumanize. One aspect of military training is to dehumanize soldiers, so they're able to do inhumane things and unthinkingly take the life of an enemy combatant, or anyone who is perceived to be a legitimate target in terms of the agreed rules of engagement for a conflict zone, and that dehumanizing training, which is a form of, I mean, brainwashing, has a very particular connotation, but I suppose the conditioning of those neural pathways, the repetition of certain actions, the repetition of responding to certain orders, the repetition of reacting to certain scenarios, and the conditioning of that human being to become mechanical in their responses and not emotional in their responses, so they are more effective killing machines. And again, killing machine, I hesitated to use that phrase because it's just a bit of a cliche, but I suppose a different way to think of it is, instead of using that phrase, you could think, soldiers are simply they're part of the machinery of war. They are components of that machine, and it would seem really clear that, from as long as we've had the language and the psychological frame of reference, that soldiers have always come back from war traumatized, and that would be the more typical, normal end product of being at war. I think it would be, and I certainly haven't done the research, but I think it would be very interesting to study soldiers who haven't, or who didn't come back from war traumatized, who managed to go through that experience and hold on to their emotional and psychological equilibrium, who basically came back in solid psychological shape. I think I'd be very curious to know what their resources were that allowed them to survive and to emerge relatively intact. I mean, barring physical injury or whatnot. But to return then to the idea of where we locate those wounds that started this reflection, I'm curious. Like, if you stop there for a moment, so we come back to my default position that fundamentally I believe everyone is damaged, which I don't know if that's. I mean, maybe that's. I feel like that's I don't think that's a very challenging idea. I mean, it depends. I mean, there's a huge range, isn't there? To say damaged, that could be something pretty minor and innocuous compared to the extreme examples I was talking about moments before. But I think to not be damaged or to not be affected, let's put it that way, that's a far less threatening phrase. To not be affected by life or not be impacted by adverse events. So, suddenly I'm questioning your, are you human? Are you completely immune to, the trials, the slings and arrows, as Shakespeare put it, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? Are you immune to that? Have you not been impacted? Is, am I a product of, am I a product of a generation, or am I symptomatic? My way of thinking, is it symptomatic of a generation that has had access to a greater range of emotional and psychological vocabulary, that there's a frame of reference that opens up doorways and avenues of interrogation and self exploration, and that then having access to that vocabulary, having access to those frames of reference, makes one more sensitive, makes one more attuned to one's essential vulnerability. That's an argument. I'm not refuting that. That is an argument, because you go back a generation again, which is my parents' generation, the boomer generation, and I think there's so many brilliant thinkers in that generation. This was, again, you're coming after the likes of Freud and Jung, but you're getting very interesting thinkers who are advancing the field of psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, psychiatry, psychology, and dropping in other influences, whether that's Eastern influences, approaches and understandings being informed by Eastern religions, Eastern spirituality, also approaches informed by sort of the zeitgeist, countercultural explorations of the mind via psychedelics, LSD. All that sort of thing is in the mix and came from boomers, the baby boom generation. And yet within that, those people were products of an earlier time. So their formative years were parents who were born in the early 1900s, 1910s, the 1920s, and that's a very different frame of reference. So when those people became parents in in the 20s, 30s, 40s, what were they drawing on with which to inform an emotional resilience in their children, an emotional and psychological resilience, or an emotional and psychological sophistication. Again, my feeling is that wasn't really the way people thought. And so it changes over time, it changes through generations with every sort of breakthrough or innovation in thinking, with every advance in those fields. The lexicon expands, the lexicon for understanding the human mind, for understanding the human range of emotionality and emotional expression. The frame expands for understanding where life hits us, and the end point for these times is you have what we call snowflake culture. Snowflakes, which is used in a sort of a viciously derogatory way to describe young adults who are so sensitive to the horrors of the world, of reality, of modern existence, so sensitive to what they see as the perceived, injustices that are all around us, that they simply cannot cope, and they are as resilient as a snowflake, which, if you've ever seen a snowflake, you take one little snowflake, allow that snowflake to come to a gentle landing on your hand, and it is pretty much gone almost as soon as it hits your skin. So in terms of resilience, snowflakes aren't really up there. Now, as I conceded, snowflake is used in a largely dismissive and patronizing and derogatory way. But, as ever, there are, I think there are elements of truth to the negative frame on that. I feel that there can be a sort of a loss of perspective, and the frame of reference becomes a little bit too small, and focusing on subjective offense and subjective hurt and a subjective sense of injustice, and the nature of where we are allowed to present our opinions now, in the digital age, in what the internet 2.0 or whatever the hell it is now, the nature of where discourse happens means that there's a sort of a, and this connects to the idea of instant gratification. So, normally when we have when we listen to that phrase, or we hear that phrase, instant gratification, we're thinking about, an appetite being satisfied, an appetite being, satiated, instantly, as quickly as possible, because there's access to that which we want to consume, and there's no limit on, there's no time frame that stops the consumer from getting exactly what they want, exactly when they want. And my argument is that in terms of discourse and in terms of expressing an opinion, that, in the past, perhaps you would sit down and compose a well-phrased letter with the hope that it would be published in your credible newspaper of choice, some well-read broadsheet, and there's a process there that forces one to stop, to think, to also have a bit of a cooling off period. And then there's no guarantee that letter would be published. Nowadays, of course, as soon as you have a strong reaction to something, political, social, cultural, whatever it might be, personal, you can jump straight on your platform of choice and let that opinion be put out there. And so I suppose in that situation, you're gratifying your need to be heard, or you're gratifying your need to speak. You're gratifying your need to participate in the discourse. You're gratifying your need to vent. You're gratifying your need to have a go at someone or something. And in my opinion, whereas it's not that there are no benefits to those to expressing those things, but I think what gets lost is reflection. What gets lost is a period of digestion. What gets lost is a broader, more informed contextualizing of that point of view. And what gets lost is the bigger sort of historical, social, political, cultural picture, out of which, this individual moment is trying to sort of leap to make itself known, heard, seen, validated. And I think that is ultimately a huge part of this need. It's the instant gratification in this model is for validation. Validate me, validate my opinion, hit me with those likes, hit me with those supportive, affirming comments that tell me I am right. And yeah, I don't know, what's the end game? Like, is this just a it's just a way that we interact at the moment. It's just the nature of how we talk to each other at this point in time. I spoke about this last week when I was trying to kind of tease out the trickiness of the discourse that arose around male violence and around the estrangement and alienation between the genders, which it feels like that's a very real thing. It feels like that's certainly for a lot of people, certainly for a lot of people who are expressing their opinions publicly and across social media, there is, that's how I would see it. And maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this is me speaking as a middle child. I'm so, I was always very wired for conflict and wired for, trying to locate the bridge, trying to locate the peacemaking bridge. I think it's something I've held on to all these years, and my radar, my antenna, my nose still goes to that place, and it just feels like there's a sort of an impasse and an inability to get around whatever the block is, so better dialogue can take place. So look, I want to leave that point there for the moment, because that came from this all came from discussing the levels of increased levels of sensitivity and increased levels of emotional intelligence and increased access to a more sophisticated vocabulary and matrix with which we can understand ourselves. And this connects back then to the way we think of our damage and the way we think of how wounded we are. And for some people, they'll go, I don't recognize that language. It doesn't mean anything to me. Stop crapping on. Stop crapping on about your wounds and your damage and your pain and your trauma, because I never spoke about that. I just got on with it and I'm okay. And I'm not going to negate that position because, again, it's sort of, you can only work with what you've got. And, humans, who are so endlessly adaptable, that's what we do. We adapt, we get on with it. Whatever hand we've been served, we find a way to survive. We find a way to access what we understand as functionality. And that is an extremely subjective term. So there will be, of course, people of various stripes and people of different ages and from different backgrounds for whom the language that I like to use is perhaps very much alien territory, alien domain, terrain, and just not. It's not a place, not a place they visit, not a place they have been to, and perhaps, and I think this is very, very common. Not a place they're interested in going to, and what's that about? Because really, that I think that's a very common or recognizable experience where, life is hard enough, we feel. And so why in God's name would I want to go and put myself in a position where I'm uncomfortable? Why would I want to expose myself? Why would I want to volunteer to be vulnerable? Why would I want to, to sort of, excoriate myself, throw myself up on the scaffold or the gallows to be hung, drawn and quartered emotionally and psychologically? To what end, when basically it's okay, I'm doing very well, thank you, without setting as much as a toenail in that space. And this is the thing. We learn so much about ourselves by stepping into those spaces. We learn so much about ourselves by stepping into the discomfort zone and challenging ourselves in that way. But it's bloody scary. It's terrifying. And I think the more extreme our wound is, the damage, to go back to this language, the more extreme we feel, that impact is or was, the more extreme the power of that space, or the more extreme the power of what we've kind of stored away neatly in a box, in a vault, in a room, in a wing of ourselves that remains very much locked up and put away, not to be opened under any circumstances. The more powerful that is, the scarier it is to contemplate going to that place. And to continue to try to answer this question that I've asked a couple of times now is, where is that located? Where do we put it in ourselves? And I think this is a very interesting area of of self-possession and of self-management, where we have kind of put these areas of pain and how they show themselves in our physicality, because I believe, that is part of our, it's part of the sort of the complexity of this organism that we are. And it's part of this extraordinarily interdependent, interactive, symbiotic organism that we are. So somewhere in our being, we are storing these memories. We are storing these experiences. And we hold them in a certain place. It might be in our stomach. It might be in our chest. It might be in our neck. It might be in our back. It might be in our legs. This is for you as the listener. If you're going to go on this little thought experiment with me, this is for you to take that moment and do that body scan, like you might see in a science fiction movie, where there's basically a crisscross matrix of a lattice of lasers slowly scanning through the body, making all the appropriate sounds, until they go, here it is. This is where you locate your pain. Why have you put it there? What makes us feel that that's the safest place for it? And where is that? So, for me, I've had the belief about myself, relating to my own internal dialogue or narrative, of what I consider the adverse events and elements and experiences in my life, that I feel that I've sort of stored that pain. I have to be careful here. I'm not going to express it correctly. Let me just recheck that. What I feel is I've got, right, bear with me now. I've got a strong back, right? Now you go, well done you. Congratulations, aren't you lucky with your strong back? But I have a strong back, but I am slightly, slightly rounded across my shoulders. Not excessively. I mean, I feel it. I'm aware of it. And, some of this is informed by, having a very good awareness of my body shape from, many years of doing sport and martial arts. But my sense is that my back is strong because I've, in a sort of a psychological, an emotional psychological sense, it's because I've turned my back to bear the brunt of pain. I've turned my back to bear the brunt of emotional and psychological pain. And so my back has had to be strong because that's what I've used to protect myself. And I would argue that I'm weak at my front. And emotionally, that's where I feel vulnerable, and does that make sense? Does that make sense to you? Because it makes sense to me, and that is it's probably it's probably quite an obvious way to understand it, but I suppose if I extrapolate from that, if I try to unpack that to sort of support what I've been talking about today, for me then the scariest place in terms of facing pain and facing traumatic experiences is to face into them directly, to face into them with openness at my front. And I'm a very unimaginative thinker. I'm quite literal in how I think about things. So I'm like, my front is where my heart is. And I suppose I can talk about the anatomical heart, but I mean I'm talking about more the metaphorical heart, and the heart, as being understood to be central to our sense of positive emotion and openness and the expression of love, the expression of appetite for life. And so, for me, in my unimaginative way, I go, well, that's at the front of me. That's at the front of me. It's in my chest area. And that's the scariest thing, is for me to face forward fearlessly with that exposed. And yeah, so there you go. And so for me, it's like wherever I took those, the wounds in my life of love that this just didn't work, of care that I wanted more from, that's where the wound was. And so my idea, and again, I don't think I'm particularly original in this, is that I made my back strong, because I turned my back then on the source of the wounds and of the source or sources of the damage. And so my back is strong. And yeah, all I'm trying to do here, I'm just trying to unpack my own thinking on this, and I'm trying to I'm trying to walk the walk and be honest and expose myself in this way, which is, it's much easier to do when you're just speaking into a microphone in a room as you look out the window on a nice winter's day. So anyway, that's that. That's kind of, I don't know if that's the conclusion to that line of thinking, but I think, I think you know where I'm coming from, and this, that the area I'm trying to articulate and shed light on, it is there. And what I said at the start was, if we struggle, or if we can't come to some form of accommodation or resolution, or the big one, the acceptance of that pain, of that wound, of that damage. If we can't get past that, if we remain stuck in the wound and stuck in the reliving of pain, it becomes too defining and holds us back and does not allow us to thrive. And it doesn't allow us to progress in life. It doesn't allow us to progress and sort of get on with who we could be. And at a certain point, the way I think about it is we have to find a way to truly let go, to truly come to that place of acceptance, and to no longer allow it to live in such a deeply personal place, to no longer allow it to live in a place of such intense aggrievement, and a place of, whatever. Like, I mean, it's not for me to say how you interpret that. If you're relating to this on any way and taking a pause to go, Yeah, this is how I understood it, or understand it. Whether it's in the area of rejection, whether it's in the area of shaming, whether it's in the area of being victimized in some way, in the area of being on the receiving end of anger, fundamentally, ultimately bringing about the most natural sort of endpoint is that feeling of, unworthiness, of lacking that sense of, lacking the ability to value yourself, to really put your self-worth in a very solid, very solid, independent place. And and I suppose this kind of leads me to the sort of the end of the kind of the thinking today. I want to quickly touch on the idea of objectivity and subjectivity. And I suppose this again, that this is not irrelevant to some of the topics I've raised today and in previous episodes. It seems that a lot of heated discourse around various issues at the moment, and over the last several years, particularly around identity politics and culture wars, extreme political ideology, extreme kind of leftism and rightism. It seems that we're in thrall to intense subjectivity, and subjectivity rules the day. My opinion, my experience, my feelings, my emotions, my narrative. These things are the rocket fuel for so much, so much apparently validated opinion, and it seems the objective view has been kind of cast aside somewhat, or relegated as being, relegated to a position of having less to offer. But if we bring it back, to the individual, if we bring it back to the personal, and let's not forget, all of this is meant to connect to an ongoing exploration of wellness, an ongoing attempt to find better equipment to do well in life, and to find better resources to live in in a happier frame. And again, I hesitate. Happy. I hesitate around that word. I mean, happiness is not the objective as such, but I think self-knowledge and self-possession, they are goals worth pursuing, because I believe that the greater our self-knowledge, the greater our self-possession, the greater our sense of agency, the greater our sense of control, which is something I value, and the greater our ability to respond in ways that serve us, that serve us best, and that harm others least. I think that's also a worthy objective. But to come back then to this kind of fundamental proposition that we are objects in the world. That's it. That's a very simple idea, isn't it? We are objects in the world. There's a tree. There are stones. There's a car. there's a building, and there is a human. And we're objects. We're just something that exists in this world. And as far as that goes, there's nothing exceptional about us, really. You know, we're just part of the flora and fauna of planet Earth, and that, I think there's something useful to be explored there, in that we can, you know, on a level, we can sort of, you know, depersonalize ourselves, and we can anonymize ourselves, and we can remind ourselves that we are merely one of billions of humans that are alive at this moment in time. We are one of billions, and we are one just like everyone else. We're just trying to survive. We're just trying to, you know, do what we can to stay alive, to stay safe, and to enjoy life while we can, in whatever ways we can. The subjective is the imposition, the placing on top of this object, a narrative. We take our subjective experience, our subjective view, our subjective recollection, our subjective memory, our subjective voice, and we use this to weave the tapestry of our lives. And as soon as someone else comes into contact with us, that's two subjective realities interacting. But yet again, from the outside, it's just two humans. It's just two objects. So it becomes a question of reality. So objectively, we can say there are two humans there. Now, if you're the other human viewing those two humans, now it's subjective. So like we need the omniscient eye, you know, this outer space view that goes, oh look, mice, oh look, ants, oh look, elephants, oh look, humans. And you know, then you can go, well, hold on, what about the omniscient eye? Is that not also subjective? You can melt your own head if you want, but I'm going to keep it back with the idea of objective reality and subjective reality. And so subjective reality is our perception of self, our perception of events, our emotional and psychological journey. And that is not to be invalidated. I mean, that's, you know, for me, like that's where you live. I mean, that's your day-to-day living experience. You bring yourself with you wherever you go. You can't detach from that. I mean, you can try and you can do whatever. You can, you know, I don't know, meditation and hypnosis and, you know, the mind-altering substances, and see where that takes you to try and remove yourself from that immersion. But that is subjective reality, not objective. And so where I'm trying to go with this, if we can kind of keep perspective on that, that can be a very useful tool in terms of building our resilience, and it may help us develop greater empathy for other people, and particularly greater empathy for those people we feel fail to understand us, or for those people we feel have transgressed against us, because we can go, well, they're not inside me. They don't know where that behavior is landing. And we can perhaps find an easier avenue via this to forgive, to absolve, and to create greater distance between us and the antagonists in our lives, if you want to put it that way. And this again brings me back to, one of the things I argued earlier, that the idea of, living well and finding that opportunity to live a full expression of yourself, to my mind, that's not about being dominant. It's not about being in some way ubiquitous and putting your, enlarging your kind of egoic presence in the world, but quite the contrary, that you realize you need that external approval or external validation much less, and that you take ownership of your own experience, your own narrative, your own points of contact with life, with the objective world out there. And then at the point of contact, it becomes subjective. And then you can drop your own frame on it and go, this is how I experience it. This is how I feel it. This is how I perceive it, how I think it, how I say it, how I sing it, how I laugh it, how I love it, how I eat it, how I drink it, how I touch it. And we're just present and in tune with our subjectivity. And I think there's power in that. I think there's enormous usefulness and presence in that. That is a way towards living well. And it also takes the responsibility of others. It takes the responsibility of others to be part of your solution, because they're in their own subjective thing. And I don't know, you've got no control over any of that. All you can do is make an offer and hope it's received in a way that you'd like. That's about it. Just like this bloody podcast. I'm making an offer, and I hope you receive it the way I would like you to receive it, which is in a receptive way. Receive it in a receiving way, and make of it what you will. Okay, I am going to leave it there today. I hope that hung together for you, and I don't think it was excessively bleak, even though it was largely in the area of wounds and damage. Yeah, but you can make up your own mind on that one. That can be your subjective reality. I thought that was terrible. That's a reality I'm not going to accept. Okay, you can, as always, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube at the Clear Out Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at the Clear Out 2. That's the digit 2, not T-O-O or T-O. So they are social media platforms where you can leave a comment, leave a reaction. You can like this show. You can share it with other people. So yeah, wherever you listen to podcasts, you will find links. There's a supporter link where you can make a one-time donation to the show if you want to support it and give me a financial boost. And thank you to those of you who have done so. And thank you also to my patrons. I have a handful of patrons who use patreon.com/theclearout to make small regular donations to the show, to the here, to the tell. And I am very grateful. I'm very grateful for you listening at all. I'm grateful for any comments you throw up there. Anything you can do to raise the profile of the podcast is much appreciated. So yeah, so let's keep it rocking. You carry on, move on with your life, move on with this week, move on with this moment. Stay safe, stay well, mind yourselves, and I will be back real soon. Okay, all the best. Take care. See you. Bye.